Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everybody to the GSSI Social Sciences webinar of today. Before introducing today's guest, let me give you some information on this event. So first of all, the webinar is recorded, so we will need your consent. For those of you who prefer not to be recorded and doesn't want to give their consent, you can still follow the webinar on the GSSI YouTube channel. Second of all, I would kindly ask you to mute your microphone and switch off your webcams for better quality of communication and to avoid background disturbances. The talk will last about 1 hour, then we will have a short break and following question time. During the question time, please raise your hand if you wish to ask a question to the speaker by typing in the chat and wait to speak until I say so. You can also make questions if you're following this webinar on the YouTube channel by posting your questions in the dedicated comment section in the YouTube page, and I will ask the questions on your behalf. So again, before introducing today's guest, I would like to introduce Alessandra Faggian, Professor Alessandra Faggian. She is Vice Provost for Research at the GSSI and also Professor of Applied Economics at the GSSI.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll be very brief. I don't have much to say, but I just wanted to thank Simona Iammarino for being here with us today and for her interesting talk. A very intriguing title, by the way. Simona has been a friend of the GSSI from the very beginning, and her support is really invaluable. So I just wanted to say again, once more, thank you very much for everything, Simona. And we are all really looking forward to listening to your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's a honor and a great pleasure to introduce Simona today, especially for me. She's a professor of economic geography at the London School of Economics and also sits in the GSSI External Faculty Board. She's a very well-known and very prolific scholar in our field and beyond, with a very high number of influential work published out there. And today she's gonna present on how monopoly, technology, and finance drive regional inequality. So Simona, I just give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrea, I'm a very lucky person because my ex-PhD students, end up by being in all the most influential and rising in terms of importance, the profile of all institutions they have been. So Andrea is one of that. And to the GSSI, that, as Alessandra was saying, is my second affiliation. And I've been there since the onset, actually. And I'm very fond of GSSI. We have a special relationship that is also formal. And so my only regret today is to be stuck to the screen and not being able actually to join the crew and the friends, colleagues, and students in L'Aquila. Hopefully, we will be able to do it soon again. Okay, let me start explaining why I chose this topic today. This is not a technical or analytical work. Is a paper that we wrote with Marianne Feldman and Frederick Guy. The paper is available on the working paper link at the Birkbeck College that is here on the first slide. It's an old version because the paper is now resubmitted to a journal and it has gone through various changes. Hopefully, let's see what happens. But I chose this topic because it's a sort of setting the agenda for future research. So I thought that, being the public, also a lot of PhD students could be a sort of thought-provoking kind of presentation. It's all open. We just set some relationships in this paper saying there is probably, there is surely need to go more in depth in many of them. So we start with 4 familiar topics, okay? The first one, as we know, and it's all over the place and all over the research, the recent research in social sciences, particularly regional studies, regional science, is the rise in individual income and spatial inequality, and the frequent failure of local economic development policies. Now, in order to, let's say, explain this, right, this increasing inequality, we use 3 arguments that are in a way interconnected, and that we feel that this interconnection has been somehow missed in the recent literature in economic geography and regional science. So the first one, first one is that this spatial inequality tends to be explained with agglomeration economies, right? I mean, we know that there are hotspots. There are, in particular, cities, large cities, where, in fact, firms' productivity, wealth, innovation, successful talent are all concentrating, leaving behind other places. So the role of agglomeration economies is being in the literature also very important in order to understand, to explain this rising inequality. The second argument that we connect, and then I will explain how it connects to agglomeration economy, is monopoly and technology and monopoly, the return of, because in fact monopoly, as we know, is not a new form or major dimension of economic theory. But what we have seen over time is a growth of market power, particularly of non-financial corporations, particularly big tech, big pharma. So those companies where information, knowledge, and technology are particularly important. The third argument that we use is financialization, and I will try to explain how we see these 3 arguments connected. And by financialization, we mean the expansion of the financial role, the financial sector role in the governance of firms, and the increasing dependence of firms on finance. Okay, so let me start. This is really the outline of my topic. Let me start. We consider the U.S. case. As you all probably know, I'm quite good in European geography. I know much less in the case of the U.S., but I have 2 co-authors that are both Americans, so I have learned quite a lot in this respect. So let's start with the world since Thatcher and Reagan, because everything actually starts from there. This is Hillary Clinton speaking in Mumbai in 2018, so after losing the election. I won the places that own 2/3 of America's gross domestic product. I won the places that are optimistic, diverse, dynamic, moving forward. And his whole campaign, Make America Great Again, was looking backwards. So let's look backwards, okay? So this is a simple map is by 709 commuting zones, right? These areas are scaled by population, and what it represents is the proportion of employees earning more than the national 80% percentile in 1980. So basically, is the top 20% of earners in the US by commuting zone. Okay. You can see that, you know, obviously the green are the winners, are those that, I mean, the concentration of the 20% top of earners, where particularly in that little, you know, this little area here that is Gary, Indiana, a hotspot of manufacturing activity, and Detroit. We all know Detroit, I mean, was one of the hotspot for manufacturing, and particularly car, automotive, and many other industries in the 1980s. Okay, and you can see that there are, you know, I mean, as usual, the coasts are obviously more industrialized, but look at the situation in 2016 at the time of Clinton and Trump. Okay, this is exactly the same map, but 2016, so the top 20% earners are now, if you can see, in the area of San Francisco Bay Area, Washington, D.C., and I would explain this as by saying that San Francisco and, San Francisco and the Bay Area in general, Silicon Valley are the biggest concentration of big tech. And on the other hand, Washington, D.C. is where political power is that protects the big tech, right? Then there are some other areas, in particular New York. New York is obviously the biggest financial center, and Boston, Philadelphia, some other hotspot in North Carolina, some in Texas, particularly Austin, San Antonio, all high-tech clusters. Let's look at the change. Okay, change from 1980 to 2016. Some places are optimistic, diverse, dynamic, moving forward, right? This is the change. Who has gained in all these years, right? And you can see that the big winners are Washington, D.C., the triangle, the research triangle in North Carolina, as I said, I mean, and there is in particular the Charlotte, which is a big hub in banking, finance, and technology. Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, so the research triangle. Obviously, I mean, we see also winners in the area of the Silicon Valley, San Francisco, big agglomeration of metropolitan area, let's say, again, I mean, in Texas. You can see, however, that the whole Midwest, basically, right? The whole Detroit, look at Gary, Indiana, in fact, is a big losers. All the Midwest has, in fact, gone down. I mean, and it's interesting to see that actually the argument that tells us that the big cities have won is not universally applicable, because cities like precisely Detroit or Chicago or even Atlanta, Georgia, actually have lost a lot. So I mean, it's this agglomeration, in particular urbanization economies, it doesn't work, okay, everywhere. It works for sure in New York. I mean, as I said, financial center for sure in Washington, political power, but there are big cities, large agglomeration that have lost a lot in terms of concentration of high earners, right? So I wouldn't say, or at least we have to be careful therefore when we say New York City is more productive, and the fact that you have a big city is an explanation for being more productive, because I mean, just let's think about the exponential growth of earnings in the financial sector that has been registered in this 30-year span. So, I mean, how much this is due to ballooning earnings compared to how much is really higher productivity has still to be ascertained. You know, behind San Francisco area, I mean, obviously we know there is Apple, Google, Facebook, or in Seattle, right, Microsoft, Amazon. We will go back more in detail to this. So this is just an impressionistic view, okay, that tells us who are the loser and who are the winners in this period between 1980, and it's a particular year, 1980, and the start of many process that, as I said at the beginning, relates to the change, the political change, and the rise of possibly the first big waves of neoliberalism or liberalism that then became neoliberalism. Why this paper? Well, I mean, the reflection on the geography of rising inequality in Europe, in the US, have been something very well explored in the literature. I cannot list all the works because I would not finish this presentation in not even in a day. People have looked at differences in employment opportunities, in erosion of wages, or in impact of housing prices, mortgages, financing, the impact of the most recent financial crisis, the most recent before this one actually, so the 2008 economic financial crisis. Skill bias, technological change has been an argument always there. I mean, you know, technology creates imbalances because some kind of skills become obsolete, and therefore there are structural adjustments that are very, very painful. Globalization, to which I've contributed myself and many other people that probably are just listening today, and so on and so forth. Erosion of institutions and institutional change is another important. So there is a plethora of studies, right, that reflects on this growing spatial inequality. However, and with Marianne and Frederick, we spent a week here in my place. This was the last June, just scanning all the literature in economic geography, regional studies, regional sciences, urban economics, in order to understand where monopoly and market structure was, how it was treated in the literature, and we couldn't find almost anything, or at least some references were found, but went back to Myrdal in the 50s or David Harvey in the 70s. So the link between agglomeration economies, monopoly power, and this new information-based technologies and financialization has not been made, is not there, or is there just in bits and pieces. There are obviously some contribution, but they focus only on some of this relationship. So let's try to make a link between increasing returns to place. Okay, we all know that, you know, are external to the firms. These agglomeration economies benefit everybody, right? Precisely because they are external to the firms. We know that they are either localization, so the classical benign Marshallian forces, specialized labor, knowledge spillovers, and value chain proximity. So I mean, input and output relationships. Or urbanization. Urbanization tells us that basically bigger is more diverse. Diversity and size matters a lot for productivity, innovation, talent, and so on and so forth. I mean, on top of all this, there is also the globalization, the spatial unbundling of production, right? Which is a theme that is always dear to me because I've been studying it for 30 years now. So this increasing local specialization within global production networks, global value chains, that is obviously in a way handmade with technology, right? Technology allows greater complexity and greater division of labor, modularization of production. There is obviously reduced communication and transport costs, so higher speed. All this obviously facilitate this division of labor across space. And we know that also internationally, you know, institutionally, the reduced tariff, regulatory barrier, free trade, multilateral, bilateral, and you know, the possibility for large firms, multinational enterprises to arbitrage in a way around the regulatory barriers, right? And so this has also, from the globalization point of view, led to spatial concentration of, in particular, of high value added functions. So as we know, there has been obviously a dispersion, but at the same time, high value function has been particularly concentrated in a few locations, okay? Now, fixing inequality, when it's due to these increasing returns to place, right? I mean, so increasing returns, agglomeration economies that are benefiting some firms because of their location, how have been addressed? I mean, how are we addressing this? How have been addressed this problem? Well, I mean, looking at the specialization or the localization, sorry, agglomeration economies, you make your place better, right? You specialize smartly, you look at your institution and try to, you know, reform institutional change, you invest in innovation, you invest in entrepreneurship, you attract foreign direct investment, or some other literature also suggests the move to the big city, right? If you are an individual and you want to have more opportunity, you have to move to the big city. Although obviously, I mean, it's not clear how we can all move to the big cities. However, in a way or in another, the policy recommendation have been based on you know, various tools in these domains by and large. Now, what is it when we talk about monopoly or market structure? Is one of the, you know, students in economics year one, right? Micro, and we study monopoly. In fact, is increasing returns that are internal to firms, right? No other way to define it. So what we claim here is that there is this business model based on I mean, platform-based business model based on linking two sides of a transaction party. So, for example, customers and suppliers in the Amazon's marketplace, okay, or friends on Facebook. Okay, so this is the platform kind of monopoly strategies or business model. Closely related to the platform model are also the business that are based on proprietary general purpose software, such as Microsoft Core Business, Office application, Windows operating system, right? These are not exactly platform, precisely because they do not link two-sided, okay? They are not linking customers and sellers or friends like platform. However, they are anyway network businesses, okay? So basically the existing users, think about precisely Office, right? The existing users benefit when when the number of users rises. Okay, there is also another business model. So platforms linking two sides, or network based on, let's say, appropriating parts of this network, like, I mean, precisely general purpose technologies, or more traditional pharmaceutical, biotechnology, digitalized entertainment, publishing, that have some characteristic of the web software-based models, okay? Extremely low marginal cost, increasing and therefore increasing returns, okay, and therefore monopoly power, precisely, I mean, you know, the appropriation of this basically monopoly power based on property rights, right? So all this, let's call them network externalities, networks and platform-based monopoly strategy interact with agglomeration externalities as we know them, right? All this has been amplified by financialization. This argument of financialization, I will link to all this a bit later on in this presentation. This was facilitated by big institutional changes in the US, okay? The change in the antitrust doctrine, Chicago School, or Bork in I don't remember exactly the year, but I believe it was before 1980s, but I mean the discipline, yeah. What he claimed was that a monopoly cannot be attacked or regulated unless you demonstrate that is harming consumers. Okay, so since Bork, I mean, it started precisely with Ronald Reagan elected in 1980, and basically what happened was that as the Bork interpretation gained momentum, all the cases antitrust pursued by the Federal Trade Commission dried up, and so there were less and less cases of antitrust. Deregulation of mostly old network industries, expanded intellectually property right, length of copyrights, right? For example, one example classical is Disney, that seems apparently immortal, okay? The copyright of Disney is on Mickey Mouse, okay? Patentability of software, patentability of algorithm, genetic codes, and so on and so forth, right? So all this facilitates, strengthen this, you know, this increasing returns that are internal to firms. External externalities, these are just simple examples, right? I mean, found on the web, Google and Facebook, I mean, you know, Facebook connecting friends, but I mean, be aware, 84% of global spending on digital advertising, excluding China, is in the hands of Google and Facebook, okay? So, I mean, digital advertising, which means basically that all the companies that before were going to local providers for advertising, local newspapers, for example, or local TVs, now are moving to two big companies in the world. Amazon dominance, okay? Amazon, basically, I mean, this is interesting. At least 21 large companies publicly listed, okay, disclose that they go through Amazon. The problem is that Amazon controls the suppliers and the customers because it has direct relationship with them, and not the large companies that go via Amazon, right? So I mean, Amazon can easily, in a way, supplant there. It has another example that, I mean, I learned recently is that Amazon branded batteries now are outselling the ones top selling Duracell batteries, right? Is produced and labeled by Amazon. And so, I mean, we have these sort of walled gardens, monopoly models of the information age. There are different typologies, as before I was talking about different business model that are information-based, network-based, platform-based, but I mean, they all rely on some kind of shared mechanism, okay? From precisely Microsoft, Apple, right? Maintain control of its system. Ironically, the system is built on top of the open source operating system, BSD Unix. Google uses Android, that is also based on open source Linux, okay? So you can see that what is in fact could be an open network, right? Becomes, I mean, segment of the network is appropriated. Sale to advertise or personal information, Google, Facebook, but also a lot of other, you know, a lot of other social networks, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. Other businesses are getting rents, basically, from smaller providers or small firms all over the world. I mean, let's think about TripAdvisor, Booking.com, Airbnb, right? Uber. I mean, Airbnb, I think when, oops, wait, I wanted, Airbnb and Booking.com take between 15 and 25% from the provision of lodging, okay, accommodation provided by hundreds of thousands of independent operators around the world, doing what? Basically nothing, okay? So all these are rent extracted from small businesses, right? And the simple intellectual property, monopoly based, is something that we are more accustomed to see. Big pharma, a lot of small farmers around the world, you know, pay for Monsanto seeds, right? Academic publishing, the same story, so on and so forth. So you can see that, I mean, there are various typologies. I mean, we tried, we were very much inspired by the work of Martin Kenny and Zeisman in 2016. That is really talking about this clearly. Now, network industries, I mean, the network industries have always been there historically, right? I mean, road, water, sewage, electricity, and in the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, these old networks expanded, okay? Postal service, railroad, domestic gas telephones, and so on. They were treated like, they were rising as natural monopolies because they had very strong increase in returns, and at the same time they were economically and actually socially essential. By the mid-20th century, all these big networks industries were either publicly owned, or under public regulation in almost every country in the world, okay? And their monopoly, the location of their monopoly, was in a way coextensive with the monopoly physical assets in place. For example, I mean, they could be owned by state, by local government. Think about the telephone. Now, I remember when I was a child, telephone calls local costed much less than national or international, right? So they were regulated at different levels, right? Which is basically they information-based monopolies instead are global, are projected over much wider territories, right? And to their home countries, they actually represent valuable export industries. So the home countries have not such big incentive to regulate them, right? This is another chart to support a bit what I am saying, right? These are the US big non-financial, non-oil company in 1976 is the red dots. And in 2016, the blue dots. This is market valuation relative to GDP, so the value on the stock market of these companies, okay? And you can see that what has happened is 1976, the two with highest market valuation, okay, AT&T and IBM were both based on network products, so this is already a sign. And in 2016, 7 out of 8, apart from GE, are based on network products. What you notice here is that market valuation has increased 5-fold, right? But employees have gone down of almost half. So these companies have a much higher value on the market, but employ much less employees than what it used to be in the 70s. Okay. Let's look at this. This is the change in a sort of measure that is commonly used as a measure of monopoly. Okay, is the ratio between market value or market capitalization, so what the company is worth on the stock market. So these are only represented in these maps are only publicly listed companies. That's why you see a lot of gray areas, because there are community zones. Only we consider only commuting zone with 5 or more non-financial firms in the Compass databases. So there are a lot of commuting zones that do not have at least 5 listed firms. But it's the ratio between this market value, how much the company is worth on the stock market is a sort of Tobin skew, and the value of the asset, all the value of the tangible and intangible assets of these companies. Okay, so what is the real assets that they own? This ratio, which here is calculated aggregating everything by commuting zone. Okay, this ratio, the higher the difference. Yeah, okay, so the higher the ratio, the higher the entry barriers, and so is a proxy of monopoly. And you can see obviously that that the share of income going to this valuation part is increasing, in particular in some of these hotspots, and going down in the typical traditional manufacturing areas, right? This also tells us, this is an argument that we found in Author and others in an article of 2017, is that the share of income that is going to labor has declined steadily, while the share of income going to profit is increasing progressively. Okay, so you can see that again, the big winner, Washington, New York, Sacramento, San Francisco, and Bay Area, Seattle, in this case also Los Angeles and San Diego. Now, how Marshallian economies, externalities meets monopoly powers. It's exactly what we were saying before, right? When agglomeration economies, so places, meets monopoly, because these powerful firms that are, internalizing and extracting rents from other places and from other sectors, locates together, these external returns of technology clusters interact with internal increasing returns to company with market powers, okay? And this is one of the from our perspective, the bigger explanation of this amplification of agglomeration productivity advantage. Winner takes all, okay? The best talent, the 20% earners, the latest information, the latest knowledge and technology are concentrated in specific places, okay? If you go and walk around San Francisco, this is a story that I saw with my own eyes just 2 years ago when we went back to San Francisco. My husband, who is also the author of this paper, is from San Francisco. It was quite shocking to see, I mean, the polarization happening there, and how this best talent and all startups being concentrated around and inside the San Francisco city. Now, startups, I mentioned that. Well, I mean, obviously, you know, when there is this concentration, the startup's objective is obviously to be there to sell to the big companies, okay? And therefore, these places, these big cities, the winning places, are not only base for monopoly firms, but also attract all these startups. The only objective they have in mind is to sell to the big companies. And the only objective of the big companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, is either to acquire or to kill them. And again, if you look at the industrial dynamics in the Bay Area, you can see that is exactly this that is happening, right? So it's a sort of, you know, location strategy, interdependent location strategy. I mean, look at this is a chart from somebody else. I forgot to put the references, but you know, you can see the venture capital and the location of venture capital in the US, right? I mean, it tells you where the money for new startup goes, right? Is pretty empty in the map, but in a very few places. And this actually is leading me slowly towards the financial argument, right? So why are we attacking monopoly? I mean, why monopoly is harmful? Well, we know that, first of all, there is this huge polarization of income, living standard within the rich and within the rich and growing tech clusters, okay? This typically experience housing crisis. I mean, we can see that in London. It's been already a few decades that we have experiencing that. San Francisco, New York, but many others, you know, of this tech platform-based places have experienced this exponential growth of housing prices, and many people who are not the talent or the startuppers, right, are just cannot afford homes and therefore are pushed away, right? The second is the general deleterious effect monopoly powers has on society, because this means precisely locking in knowledge and knowledge products that could be in fact much more diffuse, as we have seen in the case of Google or Apple, right? In a way, discouraging also skills. One thing that you hear a lot, Marianne has written a lot about it, is, you know, this new skills in programming that are lacking, that everybody's, but at the end of the day, I mean, to become a programmer, if you want to do it independently, in a way, you are forbidden. Okay, you are outside of the control of, and the best programmers, in fact, are in a way incorporated in the monopoly. And I mean, think about also discouraging entrepreneurship. Okay, I mean, competitive markets, as we also study on the book, in the books at the beginning of our career, competitive markets have a lot of advantage. Okay, also for both consumers and for producers. Third, the specific effects on places outside the tech. This is something that, you know, is important, because places that are called, as Andreas called them, right, left behind, in our perspective can be called held back, because a lot of rents are extracted precisely by them. So finance for monopoly. Let me just summarize here what we are going to argue here. I mean, we have seen a lot in the financial theory, classical financial theory. There is a lot of different vision of what to do with free cash flow, right? I mean, the optimization of financial market, how to employ and redistribute capital in the most efficient way, separated from the firm, right? So think about the last 20 years reform of pension, so pension that have been put on the financial market, corporate governance, banking, deregulation, increasing the influence of the financial sector over non-financial firms, okay? So in a way, this has led to look at the competitive sectors with small firms, I mean, the various businesses, small businesses, as a sort of source for cash flow, okay? So strip asset, invest in promising startup because the rewards are higher, and therefore this means that financial capital is employed in a better way, okay, in a more productive way. So what we have seen, growing monopolies, startups that are prospective monopolies, and therefore investment go there, because precisely when you look from the point of view of the financial investors, if you see the possibility of locking up the network and the startup can grow into a monopoly, you invest in that, okay? And drawing out, I mean, getting out capital from firms with lower returns. So those firms that actually operate in more competitive markets, okay? And if we have seen already, I mean, this venture capital in the US is definitely much more developed than in Europe. Okay, and this is actually the differences between the US and in the EU and the Europe more generally is a very interesting kind of comparison that has to be addressed in the literature. On the financial argument, there are fantastic contributions that, I mean, we list some of the most important here, but in the new version of the paper we have pages of reference. And let me just show you this in a descriptive way, this financial dependence, or what we call financialization, okay? When finance becomes disconnected from the real economy. So this is a simple indicator of this financial dependence, in the sense that this is, as the slide said, capital expenditure minus cash from operation. So basically, divided on capital expenditure. In other words, what you see here is that large positive or negative values indicate engagement with the financial sector. Okay, so basically, when the numerator is 1, is positive, it means that the capital expenditure is larger than the cash that the firm gets from operation, and therefore, I mean, the firm has to go on the market to borrow. Okay, when this ratio is negative, obviously it means that the cash from operation is larger than their expenditure, and so they go anyway on the financial market in order to, you know, I mean, the firm is generating cash in excess, okay, and therefore it has to invest somehow. It can, you know, it can pay to shareholders in the form of dividends or invest in financial assets. So basically what you have is that when it's zero, it means that the firm is self-financed, okay, is self-financing, so is not dependent on the financial market, let alone, you know, positive or negative. But you can see that, you know, this is the median absolute value, and you can see a progressive increase in the dependence of firm from financial market, okay? And this same simple measure has been interpreted in normative financial economics as an increased efficiency of financial markets, okay, better fulfilling the role of enhancing overall economic growth by finding the better use, the most productive for financial capitals. Now, in addition to that, you can see that there has been an increase in the biggest bank in the US. Concentration of US banking system has grown exponentially, particularly since the 90s, but even more after 2008. The post-2008 recession, because at this point of time, obviously one doesn't understand which recession is talking about, because it's a constant deep down. Bank closures, disproportionate closure in small, medium-sized cities and rural areas of the US, banking desert, okay? And there has been a reduction of financial resources for these held back or, you know, left behind places. That has been intensified by growing spatial concentration of commercial banking. And we calculated just the Herfindahl index for spatial concentration by commuting zone of commercial banking, and it raised quite substantially between 1994 and 2018, saying that the small banks connected with the territory, you know, the various credit, agriculture, or industry that were linked to the territory are disappearing. Right, I'm getting to the end here. Some implication of all this, okay? And this is open. This is open to all of you, whoever has you know, ideas. And I think there is a lot of research to do on this, and we are just you know, launching the message. Economic development policies have implicitly, and I would say also explicitly, treated agglomeration economies and the increasing returns localized in certain place as an attribute of place, okay? As an attribute of place, therefore interpreting, oh, look at that place, how good it is. Shall we go into that direction? Shall we use the same model? Okay, external to the firm. But we put in question this, okay? Agglomeration economies and monopoly power have been interacting, and this is evident particularly in the biggest agglomeration. The second point, and so, I mean, policies are not really working very well because they do not incorporate the fact that a lot of these externalities are not benefiting everybody, but are working in connection with increasing return to scale internal to the firm. Far from offering a model for left behind places, obviously, monopolies actually hold places back. Why? Because as we argued, appropriate revenues, which are a tax on almost all business activity in all parts of the world. As we know, Amazon is truly global. Amazon is the firm, one of the few firms that has, benefited from COVID in a massive way. So we have also to consider, who the crisis and all these crises are who are the beneficiary, in fact. They restrict the use of basic knowledge and therefore degrading capabilities. The example of software, there is literature on this, is very telling in a way. By locking general purpose technology in, there is a disincentive then to diffuse technology. And in partnership with the financial sector, by diverting capitals from other firms, from competitive industry, and these competitive industries are located in, let's say, losing regions or declining regions, or, in other backward places or middle income, declining, deindustrializing places. So the redistribution of wealth from around the world, is happening in in massive concentration between shareholders, employees of this technology platform, global companies. In fact, we can see, and financial sectors, we can see the salaries over there, right? And these are disproportionately found in a few privileged places. Now, what we argue is not that monopoly shouldn't exist, but what we argue is that monopolies should be regulated, okay? And so we call for regulation of monopoly power and financial system after 30 years since Borg, since Reagan in 1980, of seriously, because regulation worked previously in the US, as in, with the old network industries, and efforts of US state attorneys generals, some efforts also from the European Commission in the very last few years, signal a realization that these platform business models or network or information-based business model are not a technological inevitability. So, technology is going to be there only if we protect them, but are actually even more due to governments' failure, governments, national and in particular supranational, because we know now that the extent of the geography is global, is not anymore local, to regulate them adequately. So regulation and strong and rethought and in a completely new way, we believe is the only response, coordinated globally, is the only response to try to go back to a more equal world, okay? It's, as I said, more work is needed. This is an agenda paper. We as a small group, we will think with Marianne, and we are thinking about modeling some of these empirical relations. Is impossible to model all of them in a paper, using earning data by IPOMS, microdata, or from the US Census Bureau, or looking at Compustat. Again, we used already Compustat with this presentation for market valuation and company accounts. Also FDI market from Financial Times for the location of some function. I had the slides actually, but it was too much stuff. As I said, we are looking at integrated public use microdata series now and Compustat to see what we can actually try to test, in fact, empirically. But it's exciting, although in a way is quite depressing. And thank you very much for your time.
Sorry, I just realized my microphone was off. Thank you for making me notice that. So I was actually, these are drawbacks of the online modality. I was thanking Simona for this very inspiring and insightful talk about the different pieces of the modern economy that she's putting together with her co-authors in this presentation, and also calling for a future research agenda exploring these issues. This was very, very inspiring. I hope the audience shares these feelings about it. So I would like to have a break of about 5 minutes, and then we can come back here for question time. Meanwhile, whoever wants to raise their hand for a question, please type your name and a question in the chat, and we can restart from, again, questions when we are back in 5 minutes. So I would say we can restart at 4:05.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrea.
Okay, we're back. Welcome back. I hope you are all connected. So I see there is one first question by Dimitri Korpagis, whom I invite to turn off the microphone and ask his question by introducing himself, by specifying an affiliation, if that's applicable. Dimitri?
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I like very much your talk, but I would like to. I'd like to ask. I have been working in the European Commission for many years now. I'm a retired official, and we have been actually working somehow at some point together in some working groups. I was always puzzled by the fact that in Europe we have never been able to follow the modern technology revolution in equal terms with the United States. When I started my career in the Commission back in the early 90s, I have been working in the Esprit program. And that was and remains the biggest program in research and information technology in Europe. It has now gone even bigger. We spent now 10 billion in the new framework program, in the running framework program.
Yeah.
And I remember we had a lot of hopes and ambitions that we would be really making breakthroughs. Nevertheless, all the breakthroughs came from the United States. And so I'm a little bit puzzled when I listen this criticism of the US technology commerce. Of course, you can regulate more, as it has been the case, for example, in big telecom companies in the past. I mean, you gave a good example of the telecom companies, and the Bell companies was one case. But the world has advanced quite a lot. And so, this is the first point. The other point is that we always have believed that in Europe we have a problem with finance and investing in technology. We still have a huge investment gap in every single term, and the last Juncker package was also a stimulus to make investment in Europe work better. We still have not really been able to do this correctly. So I'm wondering what kind of parallelism we can build with the EU, and why we are so harsh with the US technology companies. As I said, we just use Google Meet to do this meeting.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, as I said, we are not arguing for, we're not saying that we should abolish monopoly. We're just arguing that we need, for sure, a regulation that has been going down and down and down. In this sense, there is a lot of literature out there because I mean, I have hundreds of references here, but deregulation has been much more a US phenomenon. Now, your questions are big questions, right? If I knew how in Europe we should and how, I mean, I work a lot with DG Regio, and we look, and I believe that, what we are doing and the Commission is doing with the place-based and smart specialization strategy is a right approach. What we are arguing is that there are missing parts. Now, I said at the beginning that we are not sure how the transferability of the US model is possible in the EU case, okay? We don't have data on this, and is a future research direction that is stated also in the paper. For the US, I mean, looking at the US, particularly today, I strongly believe that the productivity increases that we saw, particularly in the 90s and 2000. I mean, if you look at the price that is going to be paid today, I'm not even sure if we should have that model, right? I mean, a lot of technological innovation has come anyway from Europe. Europe had a lot of other issues in the meanwhile, right? I mean, since your times in the Commission, I mean, Europe has doubled the size to very poor countries. So why Europe has not grown like the US? I mean, there are structural, quite evident reasons for that, right? But it has become more inclusive, okay? More inclusive towards diversity. And I still believe in Europe a lot, despite I live in a country where actually this is not shared. But what I see is that the European Commission is becoming aware of these problems, and the antitrust regulation in Europe is definitely, I mean, the corporation tax laws were not as strong as expected, but the new regulation that passed in summer 2019 is a step in the right direction. So, I mean, I believe that there are different models of innovation, and I wouldn't say that of the big tech in the US is the only one.
All right, thank you very much, Simona, for this answer. I guess the parallel with Europe is something that most people might have thought about a bit. But we have another question from Stefania Fiorentino.
Yeah.
Will you please take the floor?
Ciao,
Yes.
Stefania.
Hi, ciao. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is more theoretical, maybe, but it refers to one of the first slides you have shown about agglomeration theory and the way, in a way, we are all studies about monopolies have explained things using agglomeration theory and what is missing. Yeah.
Mm.
So in a way, if we're talking about financial monopolies, maybe what we are missing is that agglomeration theory needs to go beyond the spatially constrained context. So maybe agglomeration are happening differently. So I was wondering whether what was your view on that, and what can we add to agglomeration theory in that sense to explain this financialization of
well, I mean, in our exercise here, that is the first of putting together. It's interesting because, I mean, this paper was born in a sort of very relaxed and fantastic evening that we spent in Marianne's place 2 summers ago, and it was just a general conversation. And then after that, I mean, we said maybe we can write a paper on this. It's interesting, and it's the strong point here as far as agglomeration economies are concerned is precisely to look more closely at this interaction between returns, increasing returns external to the firms, and increasing returns internal to the firms in specific location in the world. Now, we have looked at the US case. As I said, a future research line could be Europe, where the geography is very, very different, okay? And as we said also previously with the other intervention, is completely also institutionally. So, but would be interesting to see how this corresponds, for example, to the geography of global cities, right? Because we have global city and hotspot, not only Europe and the US, right? In places where the state intervention has been, in a way, has followed a completely different model, right? I mean, Asia, Japan, And so, I mean, to see but this interaction of increasing returns, internal and external, in some places should be taken into account to bring back this monopoly story, because it was there in the old geography. Okay?
Yes, it was. That's why, because I think, we can discuss days and days on how we should rebalance the economy and how can we solve these issues, but then I think none of us has a real answer. So the question is more, how can we study this issue more to learn more about it? And
well,
then
maybe go back also a bit before the neoliberalism, all entrepreneurship or private-public partnership, and look a bit more. I mean, we are going in that direction, right? Generally, I hope so. I mean, if not even COVID works, I don't know what. Frank.
Thank you, Simona.
Thank you, Steph.
Thanks very much, Stefania. We have another couple of questions. The first one by Adriana Pinate. Please take the floor, Adriana, and introduce yourself also, if you can.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello? A bit far away.
Oh, sorry. Now?
Yes, better. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. My question is very kind of specific. If you find, I was thinking about the dimension of the companies. How much this can be correlated to that.
I can barely hear you. Could you maybe echo better? Now better. Sorry.
Sorry so much. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Go ahead now.
Okay. My question is how much, if there is a correlation among the dimension of the companies and the correlation of monopoly. For example, I was thinking on Italy, and the thing that if you have a productive industry that are more like a small, medium firm, it's harder to have a monopoly of one of them. But at the same time, big company, for example, in the United States, there are a lot of them. So, but they mean that there are employment growth too. I don't know how to explain how much there is a correlation among monopoly and employment growth. If we consider that perhaps there is a correlation among firm dimension and monopoly at the same time. I don't know if you find any correlation.
Well, I mean, what we showed, this is general again, I mean, is United States based, because is precisely the picture on average, okay, shows that the US big in 1976 were much more labor, I mean, much more, I mean, they had employment as a much higher share than the big in 2016, right? It's quite evident, okay? It is also true that companies, like Ford, right, or General Motors, had a completely different nature, okay? They were manufacturing companies. And so in a sort of completely different business model from what we are considering by talking about Facebook or Microsoft or Apple, okay? And in fact, but this chart that is just, again, impressionistic shows precisely that and there is quite a lot of literature showing both in the US and in Europe that the labor share is shrinking. Okay, labor share is shrinking, and the share of capital and profits is expanding. So this is a general point that I can raise in now. I mean, firm size and employment. I don't know. I mean, these are classical relationships, right? It's interesting. I was thinking right last night when I was looking again at the slides. I was thinking, for example, that in the industrial dynamics technology literature of the 80s, precisely when there was this big debate on does size matters for innovation, what going beyond the Schumpeterian hypothesis, what people like David David Odrecht showed was that actually there is a sort of correlation between very innovative firm at the end of the distributions, which is in a way precisely what we look and we found in the monopoly places, right? So I mean, I cannot really comment on variables that weren't included in here, but I think that this slide is quite telling and also supported, as we say in the paper, by a lot of literature showing the shrinkage of the labor share.
Okay, thank you very much again, Simona. Now we have two questions from Lelio Iapadre. Please, Lelio, take the floor.
Ciao, Lelio.
Thank you, Andrea. Ciao, Simona. Thanks for your brilliant and inspiring presentation. I have just a couple of additional issues to add to your research agenda for the next few years.
Ah, that is fantastic, because this is what I was hoping for, actually. Tell me.
The first one is based on a work I made some years ago at the start of the Doha Development Agenda negotiations.
Yeah, I remember.
Because at that time, there was an attempt by the European Union and other countries to add global competition issues into the WTO agenda. And at that time, there was a strong resistance coming mostly from developing countries who were fearing to be obliged to adopt inappropriate standards similar to those that they were obliged to adopt for the protection of intellectual property.
Right, yeah.
Yet, given the fact that you correctly argued that we need something at the global level for competition, otherwise there is no possibility to regulate these giant monopolies, hoping only for a reform of US and European regulations. And I wonder how this can be possible in the current state of international relationship. So this is the first question. The second question is slightly simpler, and it was stimulated by a recent report by The Economist, arguing that an important role in the rise of inequalities and in the political problems we are facing nowadays is due to mismanagement of the housing market in rich countries, and more precisely to the fact that it has become increasingly difficult to build new houses where new houses are needed. So rather than simply contrasting the labor and the capital share of national income, we should probably also take the share of landowners and real estate owners into account.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Lelio. First of all, I remember when you were working for the Doha round, and it would be actually very interesting to if you can send me that paper, because yeah, I mean, there was at that time there was a lot of enthusiasm for international for intellectual property rights, but we can see that these precisely what we claim here is that extension of property right has been one of the major factors to allow monopoly to be there. Okay, so I mean, we refer to specific kinds of monopoly, not for monopoly per se. So I would like to go back because, I mean, history matters. We had this other webinar last week with 3 fantastic speakers on history matters and the sense of history. So we need to think about the origin of things. So I agree with you. And frankly, at the moment, you know, being here following the American situation day by day, because I have a husband and a son that are both Americans. So how there can be a sort of convergence, I don't know. However, it has to come from the people also. And I think that arguments like those that we have put in this paper can be simplified, can be spread. And there is a lot out there. And, you know, Naomi Klein, I mean, the activists that are understanding the at least the major point. So we should in a way also change our language as academic and try to be a bit more communicative with the world outside in order to pressurize, because this has to be national, but in particular international. How to reach consensus on that, Lelio? I mean, it's you know, million of euros question. So I don't know, but we cannot give up the fight, or we have to restart the fight seriously at this point of time. Otherwise, for the mismanagement housing market, this is really not specifically my area, and I take a distance from that, because half of my department is actually specialized on this, is, you know, in real estate and financial economics. So they are, I would point you to a paper that I actually cite by Andres and Michael Storper, 2009. I don't remember which journal, but is cited in this presentation, and the reference is in the paper, in our paper, which actually put in question this traditional argument of real estate and financial economics that says, well, it's a matter of land and house supply. At least in this big agglomeration, the big agglomeration that I was talking about, I think is not really a problem of, is not that much a problem of availability of land, but is a matter of earning salaries that are not commensurate to the real economy and to the production or productivity. So also productivity statistics in a way are not taking into account the fact that salaries can be inflated. So, I mean, as I said, have a look at that paper by Michael and Andres, because their argument is quite interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Lelio lost the connection in the very last seconds.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Oh, here he is again.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I would move on. There is.
Sorry, Simona, I lost the connection.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I thank you for your answers.
Okay, you hear me. You heard me anyway. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, only the last few words.
Okay. Look at the paper. Look at the paper by Andres and Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I think there is another question. We have another question from Ugo Rossi. Please take the floor.
Yes, thanks for your very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. I have basically two questions. One is, what about Main Street capitalism in this context in which there is?
Can you repeat? What about
Main Street capitalism? Main Street capitalism.
Main Street.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to admit, I don't know this expression, main street capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's by main street capitalism, it is meant, especially in the US context, small and medium-sized firms, and the ideal of the self-made entrepreneur in the United States. So in this situation of increased monopolization of economic activity and its effects at the local level, main street capitalism, which is small firms basically, are confined to peripheral regions and cities, or there is still what public policy can do for this kind of small firms. And the second question is related to this one, but also to the post-COVID transition, and also the policies that have been adopted to tackle the crisis, the economic downturn during the lockdown. I've read that like there has been a conflict between standard small firms and startup firms, because startup firms which have big venture capital backing them have also drawn on these relief funds. And so there has been a conflict between these high-tech firms and the rest of small firms. So in this kind of very complicated situation, my question is, are we kind of witnessing the end of the Jacobsian from Jane Jacobs idea of the economy of cities and of local economies as the conjunction of diversity and agglomeration in the business ecosystems of cities? So we have agglomeration, but a diversity of these ecosystems at the local level, especially in these big cities, in these major cities. We don't have any longer diversity because there is a domination of a few high-tech giants, especially in the digital sector. So it's a kind of a lack of diversification of local economy. Thank you.
Okay. I never, frankly, I never heard this expression, main street capitalism. This is nice. I mean, you know, there is something policy can do. Of course, I mean, we have seen all kinds of possible support to small and medium enterprises during the post-2008 crisis. I mean, we're not arguing that is not adequate. What we are arguing is that it might be ineffective, right? Because the rent extraction happens at a much higher level. So if you incentivize small firms that, however, have then to pay royalties for advertising to Google, that is something that is a sort of contradiction in terms. Having said that, and I mean, the kind of intervention that has been put in place, this is personal opinions, obviously, in the 2000 and even more with the austerity argument, okay, post 2008, austerity argument everywhere, anywhere, has been mostly a retreat, in fact, of public support, regulation, intervention, but leaving a bit more, it's the neoliberalism that we have seen, right? Leaving more scope to private public, right? I mean, like the local governments and dealing with the firms, right? or the privatization of public sectors, or I mean, so you know, the intervention supporting firms have also happened in a sort of a vision that was very much influenced of by this austerity mood, budget constraint, reduction of deficit and debt, which have impacted, right? I live in the UK. I've seen with my eyes all the libraries or NHS or, you know, just compressing or sold to private firms that were not at the standards of carrying out properly. And I mean, there are services that cannot be privatized, but this is a personal opinion. Now, so, you know, also this kind of intervention have to be rethought. And going back to the first question, you know, innovation is a lot of diffusion. Innovation is not only creation, and for the to diffuse as much as possible than to create in a few hotspots, and getting rid of this, you know, the market will win, because the market has not won, and this is quite clear. Now, the Jacobian diversity, actually reading Jane Jacobs by, I mean, she was the first to put a lot of, you know, caveats on diversity. Okay, she I mean, I think her perspective is not dead at all. Diversity is good. Diversity is good in small villages as in large cities. Okay, and this is where the world has to go. Diversity, coexistence of people, of cultures, of religions, of, you know, attitudes, trying to make the most of it. Okay, and we're very far from there. I don't think that the rhetoric of, I mean, she was also very critical of, you know, of these cities and the kind of negative externalities they can create. So, you know, as I was saying at the beginning of my presentation, we have very successful cities, but we have a lot of cities that actually have lost completely, have gone down. So it's not necessarily that city big is better. Okay, depends on other factors. So our argument is just to prompt a new reflection on what drives power and money. Okay, these are the two. COVID-19, darling, I mean, you know, I have no idea, and I'm not prepared to reply this question. It's unfortunately, you know, I'm a poor regional economic geographer, and I do not have the ball to predict the future. So you see that it's difficult even to interpret the policies that have been applied post 2008. Think about what is going to happen from now on. I mean, public, I mean, state intervention at different levels of geography. This is what I believe strongly. Okay, so from the supranational to the national to the region to the local. Otherwise, the market is going to fail even more.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simona, for this answer. I don't see more questions, but I do have one or two questions actually.
Yeah.
I found in particular very interesting the reference to finance and financial aspects, which is something I guess that, among other things, is sometimes overlooked in our field, in economic geography in general. And I found your graph about that quite interesting. I was wondering whether you can elaborate a bit more on, for instance, whether there is some sort of sector heterogeneity behind the dependence on finance, or even in terms of life cycle of firms, maybe the access to finance for startups is different from those firms that want to expand abroad, for instance?
I mean, Andrea, as you know very well, this is definitely not in my remits, and we just touch upon this because Frederick and Marianne have more expertise than me in that direction. Although we rely a lot on work that has been done. Although you're completely right, I'm looking for the references here. You are completely right that in economic geography there is quite, is a very restricted field. Right here, there is this beautiful book by Martin and Jane Pollard, that I have it here and I don't find it immediately. But anyway, that is an edited book with a lot of very good colleagues that treat finance in an economic geography perspective, but it's a very narrow and hopefully growing, okay, Crevoisier and others. But if you look at the argument of people specialized like Bill Lazonick or Mary O'Sullivan, that they look at finance in the broader economic history, innovation, and historical perspective, you see that the links can be made very well, okay? What we have argued in this paper, this is, as you see, this index of financial dependence is showing, the data are CompuStat, so it's the largest database for firm level based, and you can see that financial dependence now, independently from positive or negative, has increased anyways. Both that the firm, in the case of the firm, is making cash and therefore wants to invest, or in the case the firm is actually indebted, as it is the most cases, and therefore has to borrow. A lot of this money is going into these monopolies, okay? Because this story of startups in these different hotspots that are, very small, very talented and highly educated people that really bank. If you just walk in central San Francisco, you will hear only people in their early 30s talking about that. So it's an experience that one can have very easily, provided that you can go to San Francisco, because you don't hear anything at all mentioned. Then how are we going to sell? When are we going to sell? Did you hear that he sold, or did you hear that he shot because he is like this all the time? So you really get the sense of this financial capital trying to build prospective monopolies. I expect that precisely continuing the work on CompuStat data, I will have a better industry heterogeneity or of the phenomenon, but I sincerely do not have at the moment. It would be very interesting to have it, so maybe next year I can shed more light on that.
Yeah, thanks very much, but this is very informative enough already at the moment. So
thank you. Well,
I don't see more questions, so I can go on with my second question, which is which is less specific than the previous one, and it's actually broader, and it takes into consideration that most of this audience today consists of PhD students, for instance, or other young researchers. So I would like to speak about the future research agenda that you envisage, and I was just wondering whether you can, tell us some illustrative topics or broad research questions that you think can be very urgent in the perspective that you're offering here, and whether this future research should exclusively focus on the US, or there is also room for this type of research in the context of European countries or other countries?
As I said, it is very, very important, in my opinion, to translate this argument in different contexts. And I really welcome, I would love to see more work done by others in various areas. These are, I mean, the arguments that we put together also, I mean, the paper went to review and the reviewers were very positive, but at the same time really expanding and putting more meat on the grill. So is probably an agenda. I mean, an agenda that can be pursued by young people more than anyone else, because they are always the best in bringing new ideas. We are definitely now looking into the CompuStat market valuation company accounts, because we would like to measure better this monopoly growth over time and its location. And I mean, probably what we will do is take the chunk of monopoly and finance, in fact, because that is the most impressionistic link. Obviously, I mean, me and Marianne can articulate very well on agglomeration economies. Frederick, I mean, this whole idea of putting together is Frederick's. So, but I think we are going to continue on the US also, because the US has these large data sets that can actually give us some kind of analytical relationship to test. While in the European case, to have such a large, I mean, you have to go to the national level, and to the national level, something like this is a bit more difficult to prove, okay? Also because the geography of Italy compared to the geography of the US or of the UK is completely different. There are a lot of other factors, but I think that it's a promising field, right? I mean, if you break the relationship of monopoly and firm size, as it has said, or monopoly and technology, there is a lot of work done also by Spru, Maria Savona, and all the people there, right? So, and then we can put the puzzle together, but this has to be a collective effort, right? So me, Marianne, and Frederick are going to actually have a Skype call right on Monday to decide the next step. But this is I'm very pleased and grateful to the GSSI, to Alexandra, to you, and for having had this opportunity, because precisely is I think is a collective effort. I think it is important. Each of us can have slightly different perspective, but I believe is something that we have to address. We have the moral as scientists, right? The obligation to pursue further.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's very interesting, in fact. Again, I don't see more questions, so
It's
I take
okay.
this
this
unique opportunity to make another question, and then maybe if there are no more questions, we can close. So my question now is probably even broader, and it's more an open question for debate, and I guess nobody really has an answer, so it's more about to know your opinion on it. And in a way, it goes back to what Lelio Iapadre was asking before, when he mentioned the Doha round of trade negotiations. And I think that in a way, enters this framework of globalization that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years, maybe, where multilateral governance has increasingly left on a side in favor of unilateral or bilateral sort of negotiations in different terms. So this is more maybe a question in terms of international political economy or geopolitics. So what you're presenting seems to call for a multilateral action, but we increasingly see, on different matters, interventions in European affairs, for instance, by external actors actors such as Russia or China that might be dividing EU members on specific decisions. So I'm just wondering what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think Lelio would be in a much better position to reply this question for me. But I mean, you know, it's one thing is to regulate monopoly. One thing is then thinking about global transaction. Although obviously everything is interconnected, I believe. I mean, it would be in the ideal world a very strong regulation that applies exactly as IP. I mean, intellectual property rights have been, you know, imposed to half of the world and protecting precisely the monopolies. Going back and thinking about a different way. I think that anyway, even if, you know, we cannot put together 220 countries, whatever is the number in the world, there are some blocks that are particularly influential and, you know, an action strong, different on making taxes paid. You know, I mean, the taxes on corporation could sort out a lot of the public deficit if we were to apply really strict all regulations. And, you know, so I think that if we do not start, because we have to wait 200 countries to get together, I mean, you know, it's the history of human beings show that that is not the way to go. But there might be some champions, okay? And I hope that champions in this direction can be us as Europeans, first and above all.
Yeah, I guess we all hope so. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Don't see more questions, and it's almost 5, so I think we can thank you once again for this very inspiring talk.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon again in person at the GSSI.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all, and thank you for the attention and for this great opportunity that you have given me. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Simona. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.